Instead of Temu, check out PCBWay when you need professional 3D printing. More in a minute. I just bought the cheapest 3D printer on Temu, the Easythreed K9. Was this a waste of money?
Yes.
Did I get scammed?
Yes.
I want to use this to teach my 7-year-old the basics of 3D printing, like picking a model, loading the filament, and watching it print. I found that this Easythreed K9 was as cheap as it gets. The K9 isn't even listed on their website anymore. The print volume is 100 millimeters in each direction, so it's a small print volume. It advertises up to 40 millimeters per second print speed and a fast 5-minute hot end heating time. It's just about all plastic and also came with an SD card that has an old version of Cura on it or a homebrew slicer for the beginners. Also the cheapest at the time, coming in at $11.43. It's blue, it's PLA, and it doesn't fit on this printer. In fact, this printer weighs less than a full kilogram. In fact, it probably weighs less than this used roll of filament. About $100 later, I submitted my order, and a few days later, they arrived, which was fast for Temu considering how slow they deliver my wife's. If you're familiar with 3D printers by now, you probably know how excited I was to spend $80 on this. And if you aren't familiar, let's start with the build quality. Like I said, it's all plastic except for the parts that have to be metal, like the rails on each axis, screws, springs, and the hot end. Each axis is literally identical to each other and slots into plastic housing as you build it. And then it's secured with a single tiny screw on each axis. In fact, the screwdriver they give you is smaller than the head of this screw, so I had to use my own tools. I'm really trying to deliver a win here. The wiring harness is designed so that you can't mess it up. Each axis is just far enough from the connection that you can't plug in the wrong axis to the wiring harness. The extruder is under a plastic flip-up cover so you can see the hot end. We have a fan that blows on both the extruder and the hot end, and I actually like this clear cover on the extruder so I can tell if it's actually feeding or not. The hot end does heat up in the 5 minutes they state, which is still a very low bar. There is no bed heater either. It uses tiny holes to improve the model's adhesion, which can be frustratingly effective. I hear that an aftermarket heated bed can be bought, but there's no temperature adjustment for it, and it uses its own separate plug, so you'd have 2 plugs. Hard pass. Remember, the entire package is 24 watts, while just an Enders 3 hot end alone is about 40 watts. Once built, you can look at the controls. To level the bed, you have 4 buttons on the front, labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4, which refer to the corners of the bed. It'll move the hot end to. First, it'll home to its position, and then place it in one of the corners. Once in position, you'll manually level the bed using these knobs to raise or lower it like any other manual printer. If you're not familiar with the leveling process, you'll get a sheet of A4 paper, and at every corner like it's at now, you'll slide the paper in between the nozzle and the bed. You want to feel some resistance. You don't want to feel it moving freely, or you don't want it stuck. Once you've completed the first corner, you'll move it to the next corner. And repeat. Once you do one rotation, you'll want to do it again. There is a feed and retract switch that moves the gears on the extruder when it's time to add filament, a USB port for firmware updates only, micro SD card for your models, and of course that 24-watt DC power plug. Finally, a play button that I assume picks the first slice model on the card. I actually don't know. I only ever printed the one Benchy on this, and it worked without any input. Future TK here. If you need a quality print but don't want to spend the money necessary for a great printer, unlike my K9 review here, then head to PCBWay. They can take your model, even huge models, handle the hassle of a perfect print, and ship it to your door for a great price. If you're interested in CNC machining or custom PCBs, they have excellent options for you too. Check them out with the link in the description below. So what was the printing experience like? Oh, I'm excited to share that with you. First, I put the SD card in my computer and mistakenly ran the software. If you've cringed at that, then you know I should have spun up a VM, but still, I didn't have a terrible time here. I'm just not using that computer for any banking. When loaded up their homebrew slicer, I was greeted with the Unity logo, selected my Benchy file, imported it. I sliced it with the quality setting, giving this the best chance to give me a quality print. Saved it back to the SD card and moved that SD card back to the printer. I did the leveling loop 4 times because each loop, the hot end dug into the bed. There is an incredibly bad amount of slop in this build of the printer, which means I never got that perfect level. Even the plastic supporting the bed flexes as you level it, which must be why all other printers use metal to support the leveling hardware. Once I thought I had it right, I fed the PLA into the extruder, and while doing this, I found out that I couldn't retract filament at the time, although later I learned you have to wait for the hot end to heat up, but all it does is blink the play button, which means I thought it was trying. Regardless, I have my filament ready, and then I press play. My hot end fell against the bed and burnt a hole into it. Great. Once it started printing, it made a gigantic raft. And of course, my hot end jammed into that bed with zero clearance. This filled the holes in the bed with PLA and created a really ugly raft. Thankfully, that hot end didn't stay on the bed long enough to melt another hole in it. It was at this point I knew I was going to regret my purchase. I attempted to level it on the fly, but my results were all crap. The print got much better once the raft was over, and maybe the gap was correct under the hot end, or maybe the filament just had somewhere to go other than further into the bed. I don't know. Benchy took 10 hours. I am not exaggerating. To print, and the results were depressing. It's easy to label 1 or 2 issues, but just look at this comparison and see for yourself. I feel it might be another 10-minute video in itself, but that's another day. It looks like the slicer added supports by default, which I didn't anticipate, but I'm not printing this again for 10 hours. I was able to rip Benchy off the bed, but I had to use razor blade to cut off the raft because it was so embedded into the holes of the print bed. The second print with the blue PLA went a little better. Since the print doesn't hold the 1 kilogram roll of filament, I had to get creative with the Lazy Susan I have. Similar results when it came to leveling again, except this time I didn't preheat the nozzle deep into the bed. 10 hours later, it's a little easier to remove since the white PLA made a relatively smooth bed surface. Again, I'll show the comparison, and it looks a little better, especially in the front and the amount of stringing. If the cheapest PLA on Temu prints better than the supplied PLA with the printer, that's really bad. Finally, I printed Benchy on my Bamboo Labs P1S with the Temu filament, and it turned out pretty good. So, quality filament does print even better than this, but you wouldn't know it unless I had another quality Benchy here to compare that against. This Benchy took almost 20 minutes, and while I know these two printers aren't even in the same league together, you can do much better and get similar results with another $20, getting an Ender 3 used for about $100 on Facebook. This bar is not that high, and the print quality of the K9 just isn't it. Alright, so my next steps. I'm going to see if it can be recycled. I wanted to let my 7-year-old have this as her first printer to use together, since she lives to craft, but a printer like this would sour someone wanting to get into the hobby. Whether it's time it takes to print, the print quality itself, or even using that software and the limitations it has. I paid $80 and I routinely see those Ender 3s listed for $100 on Facebook. I bet you can negotiate down to 75-ish. Micro Center, even for a bit, had a promotion where new customers could get an Ender 3 for $50, but that has since expired in 24. I'm not going to spend any more time on this because I'm not going to wait hours or days for prints to finish, even if I can improve that print quality. I want to hear your opinion. Do you have this printer? Does it work great? Is mine truly a lemon? I feel like I should have returned it as soon as I was unable to level this.